All right, everybody, let's go back to our sharing screen. And we're going to go and move on to the history of WGS MUBIS. So our need for WGS really came from this need to rebalance the curriculum. And by that, I mean that our curriculum was considerably focused on white middle-class male perspectives. And we really wanted to broaden that perspective because history isn't just experienced through that lens. And we wanted to make sure that we got multiple perspectives so that we had a more accurate depiction of what history looked like, of what language looked like, what literature looked like, of what the social world is experienced like, and kind of broaden our understandings of our world. And so we really wanted to focus on women as subjects of study, and we later kind of wanted to expand that into all genders, including non-binary individuals, including gender fluid individuals, including trans individuals, including all sorts of different identities that are under the cosmos of gender. And then we also wanted to use language and wanted to create language and use the naming process to talk about systems of oppression and discrimination. And the goals really were about, for students, were individual consciousness. So we wanted to create awareness building. We wanted to give students a place to see themselves and also to see others within our view of the world. We wanted to create social networking and broaden ability for community building. And we wanted to create academic inquiry around all of these ideas. We wanted to create a different pedagogy. We wanted to create different strategies. We wanted to create different types of academic spaces. And with that, we wanted to create different social theories about the world based on our information that we gathered, created, and transformed. And then why feminism within this framework? We chose feminism as part of this kind of ideology surrounding women and gender studies because of its intersectionality, because of its ways of looking at the world, because it's focused on social change, and because of the focus on calling out or centering social inequality and social injustice within conversations of feminism. So, feminism is focused on equality of the sexes. And so in doing that, it requires us to call out, to name, to create social change. And we wanted spaces academically to transform and transcribe all of these ideas. And so that's really why it's linked to feminism in such a very distinct way. And then before we get into this, we want to talk about some myths of feminism that are brought up in your book and then some that aren't. This idea that we're kind of post-feminism, that we're all equal now, that equality doesn't exist anymore. And again, with all of these situations, there's this like little bit of grain of truth within them that harvests and fosters this like massive backlash. And so in this one, it's not that there hasn't been systemic and good amounts of progress made. It's that there's nowhere near equality, and that's the problem. And so really what we want to talk about is not just equality or equity, but we want to talk about justice. We want to talk about reframing so that we don't get back to inequality. We want to talk about not losing ground and those kinds of things. That we as feminists exaggerate the discrimination. So feminism has a good way of using personal stories and creating those markers. In that way, personal stories are individualized experiences. And so it's hard to say that that experience is homogenizing, because that's not what our goal is. Our goal is not to homogenize experiences. And so in that, sometimes moments can feel exaggerated. That does not mean that they're untruthful, right? Like, discrimination is vast and it's wide and it's frightening. And it is incredibly overwhelming. But exaggerated, I do not think that that is the case. But it's also individualized. And we're going to talk about kind of that dynamic that plays out there. that they're just man haters. Now, there's points in which women get very frustrated at men and their lack of ability to see their own privilege within their own social world. But that doesn't make us in any way, shape, or form women man haters any more than men should hate women for wanting equality, right? And so that's just one of those things that's consistently brought up and consistently inaccurate. There are so many multitudes of feminisms or feminists that have, almost all of them have male individuals in their life, whether it be sons, whether it be fathers, whether it be brothers, whether it be partners, whether it be best friends, whether it be social networking groups. Like, having relationships with men is part of living in the world, and caring about them is also part of that. So describing feminists as man haters and also alienating men as being feminists is what that in the goal of that. And that's so we want to strike that down. We want to bury that hatchet and move on. And we want to and so again, that you want to be men, or that we want to flip the power script and let women be completely in charge. And I think this one's always the most interesting to me, because what it's doing is acknowledging that there's a power differential between women and men, and the same time saying that, well, the only thing women want is to flip that script and to have power over us. And that in and of itself talks about the inherent acknowledgement that there is that argument has, right? That, well, obviously we have more power and we should keep it, and women just want it. Okay, well, we want equality, and feminism strikes for equality, which means that there would be a power, that power differential would have to change. But it's not that we want to flip the script and have more power than men, because that isn't equal. That denotes the entire thing that we're trying to work towards. But again, I think it's very interesting and striking that in and of itself has to acknowledge that there's a power differential, citing for men in order to even have that argument in the first place. Another one that gets thrown out there all the time is that all feminists are lesbians. Not all feminists are lesbians, but some lesbians can be feminists, and vice versa. Some feminists can be lesbians. That does not, again, being a lesbian does not make you a man hater and or any less desiring equality from the sexes. It also homogenizes the idea that lesbians are all feminists, and or that all feminists are lesbians. Like that homogenizes people in ways that just don't make sense. That's not the way the world works. And it's something that has consistently been there for well into the better part of 80 years, 80 to 100 years. We also hear a lot that we just don't want to be mothers, or we don't want the responsibility of raising a family. As a feminist mother, that doesn't track with me. It again homogenizes experiences, but it also has that grain of truth in the sense that feminists want women to have the choice in their idea to be mothering. They want women to be able to choose not to mother, or choose to have a career if they opt for that option. It also chooses to the idea that parenting should not just be solely a mother's responsibility, that parenting is about both parts of the parenting. And it's about sharing responsibilities. So I think that while there is truth in the sense that feminism allows women the space to choose not to be parents if they don't want to, and that choose that mother not have to be their primary role, their primary identity source. But it also chooses that if you want to be a feminist mother, you can. And there's a lot of distinctions and variations depending on the kinds of feminism that you curtail. But I do want to set that aside, because that's, again, a homogenizing idea that is just not accurate. And then the last one is that feminism is a white middle class movement. And there have been historic periods where the mainstream feminist variety has been a white middle class movement. That is not depictive of what is currently happening. And at every point in history, there have been feminist factions that have not been that. And in every point in history, there have been women of color leading the feminist movement. At every point in history, there have been impoverished individuals leading the feminist movement. At every point in feminist history, there have been feminist men, there have been feminist lower class, there have been feminist women of color, there have been disabled feminist women, there have been queer feminist women, and the erasure of those voices has often happened as part of the broader societal understanding of feminism. And that is something that has dramatically changed since the 90s. And that is something that is incredibly important to what feminism is now. And so that's kind of where I'm going to leave our conversations about WGS starting and feminism as a whole. And then we're going to get into each one of those little readings, and we're going to talk about those for just a bit. And then I will let you go for this module. But I hope you guys are working through this. If you have any questions as we work through this, please do not hesitate to ask me.